Amidst all of the talk about recognition of a Palestinian state, the IDF's heavy artillery is coming to Gaza City as organized Hamas units are collapsing and their commanders are fleeing. However, another senior Hamas figure was eliminated as the number of residents believed to have evacuated the city is growing and the fighting intensifies. And meanwhile, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and Portugal all made announcements on Sunday extending diplomatic recognition to a Palestinian state, as Hamas published a list of their highlights and many Palestinians celebrated. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu replied that a Palestinian state will not be established, and Israel is considering countermeasures. And meanwhile, Qatar has severed their relations with Israel and will tell you about some of the heavy blows that they're trying to implement. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, reporting on what is happening in Israel. And today we are partnering with Ratchets Israel. Almost 2 years after Hamas's massacre on October 7, 2023, 4 major Western countries declared the recognition of a Palestinian state on Sunday, one after the other. In his announcement, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke about the hostages, accused Israel of cruelty, and claimed that this is not a prize for Hamas. Canadian officials said that their government had lost hope for an agreement settlement. And Australian officials insist that their government has received commitments to reforms in the Palestinian Authority. Portugal's foreign minister in his announcement said that he hopes that Israel will understand that this is for peace and for the rights of the Palestinian people and not against Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu flatly rejected these statements, adding that a Palestinian state won't happen and that he'll have more to say about this when he returns from his own trip to the United Nations General Assembly, which will also include a visit to the White House later this week. And meanwhile, things are heating up on the ground in the Gaza Strip as the IDF is preparing to intensify the operations against Hamas with the assistance of tremendous firepower from the air and even from the Navy. And meanwhile, even as they demand that the civilian population of the city stay in place so that they can be used as human shields, Hamas terrorists, including commanders and Nukhba forces, are seen leaving the city with their families under cover of the mass civilian evacuation. Going in the other direction, large columns of the IDF tanks have pushed into the heart of Gaza City and the Shati refugee camp, destroying Hamas infrastructure and engaging in terrorists at close range, while Division 162 reached the outskirts of Sheikh Adwan. And elsewhere, about a week and a half after the Israeli airstrike in Doha, Qatar is stepping up the legal and international fight it's waging against Israel, but at the same time the assessment is that Qatar does not intend to give up its role as a mediator in the negotiations with Hamas. And amidst all of this, it seems that Iran was worried that someone would forget about them. And after reports of an intercontinental missile test, and against the backdrop of tensions with Israel, the Revolutionary Guards issued a threat saying that Iran's hand will be on top. It will seize the initiative on the battlefield in a lethal and instructive manner once more. I guess I must have missed it when they did that the first time, huh? But in any case, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what's happening in Israel on day 717 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region taking their orders from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And today is a holiday edition because we are entering into Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. But we are here to spread the truth about what's happening in Israel, and we invite you to stand with Israel, help us fight against all the lies, leave a comment, hit the like, and most importantly, don't forget to click on the subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we are starting today's report with the news from the Gaza Strip. Division 36, the largest armored division in the IDF, with the heaviest firepower, has begun maneuvering in Gaza City together with Division 98 and 162nd. And according to the IDF, more than 550,000 residents have been evacuated from the city, and the fighting will intensify going forward. And during the operation, the forces located weapons and ammunition that is found in civilian buildings. In addition, the forces located tunnel shafts, underground routes, and cameras used by the terrorist organization for surveillance and intelligence collection on the maneuvering forces. In parallel, and throughout the ground maneuver, the Divisional Fire Center, in cooperation with the Air Force and the Intelligence Directorate, struck more than 120 terror targets, including military buildings that are identified to have terrorist activities in them, terrorists of various ranks, observation posts, and more. The IDF is deepening the entry into the Gaza City area, with Division 162nd operating on the outskirts of Sheikh Radwan and the village of Jabalia, expanding the fighting deep into the area and preventing the terrorist organizations from entrenching in the sector. In recent weeks, the IDF also initiated a wide operation to warn the population, the Palestinians, for its protection from the combat zones using a variety of operational tools, including distributing voice messages, dropping leaflets, sending text messages, and conducting phone calls to tell them to leave certain areas. In addition, the IDF announced the humanitarian zone in Khan Yunis and is leading an extensive effort to adapt humanitarian infrastructure in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, including expanding field hospitals, repairing and connecting water lines and desalination facilities, alongside the continued regular supply to the area of food, tents, medicines, and medical equipment. And against the backdrop of the expansion of the fighting in the Gaza Strip, the IDF spokesperson, Brigadier General Efi Defrin, said on Sunday evening that the state of Israel continues to be under a multi-front defensive operation. This week alone, we face threats from every direction. A terrorist crossed from Jordan at the Allenby crossing in a truck carrying humanitarian aid and opened fire. This aid was intended for the residents of Gaza, and Israel, time and again, allows it to enter while Hamas is blocking it. In Ramallah, our forces exposed rockets that were prepared to be launched towards homes in Israel. In southern Lebanon, Hezbollah's Radwan forces continue attempts to rearm and to seek Israel's destruction, while from Yemen, the Houthis continue to fire ballistic missiles and UAVs directly at Israeli civilians. Just today, rockets were once again launched from Gaza into Israel. And with all of that in mind, the IDF has warned that the fighting in the Gaza City will intensify moving forward and become much more intense, with a spokesperson saying that this was a particularly challenging move. We are talking about enormous numbers of people who left the city from the humanitarian area to the southern parts of Gaza, and the mass departure essentially will allow the entry of the armored divisions into Gaza City. The IDF also stated that as part of the operational method of the Hamas terrorist organization, the IDF identified attempts to prevent the movement of civilians southward, contrary to international law, through the cruel exploitation of the civilian population, using them as human shields. Alongside the threats issued by the Hamas leadership to its people not to abandon Gaza City, Palestinian reports are now emerging that some operatives are in fact leaving that area. This includes both simple fighters and medium-level commanders who refuse to obey orders to stand and fight, but instead flee together with their families under the cover of the hundreds of thousands who left Gaza City area. According to Palestinian sources, these are not isolated cases, but a larger number of operatives, even if no official figure has been published. Hamas is trying to block the phenomenon by two means: threatening those who choose to leave, and in parallel, recruiting terrorists from other brigades into the city to reinforce the forces that remain there. However, the assessments are that a large majority of Hamas terrorists are not in Gaza City at all, but in the El Mawasi and in the central camps, alongside tens of thousands of displaced people, Palestinian civilians. In the city itself, according to the estimates, only a few thousand terrorists remain. Despite this, the IDF statement continued by saying, "We destroyed terrorist infrastructures in neighborhoods on the outskirts of Gaza, Jabalia, Sheikh Rajwan, Zaytun, Farkan. The operations are thorough, systematic, and deep. The activity is carried out based on concentrated intelligence efforts and powerful concentrated fire that can be heard as far as the central region of the country. In parallel to the fighting in the Gaza Strip, the defense establishment is also preparing for challenges in another arena, Judea and Samaria. Central Command has reinforced forces in that area with an emphasis on the seam line and deployed 3 additional battalions out of concern over a security escalation and attacks during the upcoming holiday period. This preparedness also stems in part from the expected announcement by many more countries at the United Nations General Assembly that recognized a Palestinian state. In the defense establishment, they understand that the move could lead to an increase in attempts to attack Israelis. Already now, there is an increase in the volume of warnings, and accordingly, the level on the ground has been raised. And to make a brief personal comment on all of this, I was born in Jerusalem and have lived in this city my entire life. And every time there is any kind of peace initiative from Western countries that includes concessions to the Palestinians, it is always accompanied by a worsening of the security situation here in this area. These Western countries all insist that this move of recognizing a Palestinian state is not meant to be against Israel, but to improve the situation for the Palestinians and build momentum for peace that would benefit both sides. But that's never how it is perceived on the Palestinian street, and the results speak for themselves. Those of us who live here will have to manage the consequences of those misguided attempts by Western governments to give us so-called peace. However, the Bible is telling us that they will also face consequences for their actions, and candidly, I wouldn't trade places with any of them. In any case, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on this issue, and we invite you to keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, give a click to that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, I want to tell you a short story about some of the hardworking people who make Israel what it is. So just miles from the Gaza border, Zion Maman has spent his life farming the same land that his father once turned from dry sand into rich, fertile soil. His son, Tal, was proudly carrying on that legacy until everything changed on October 7th. That morning, terrorists attacked their community, and Tal was part of the local security team. He fought bravely, but never came home. Zion was crushed. He nearly gave up the farm, but his friends reminded him that this is what Tal would have wanted. And that is when Leket Israel stepped in. Volunteers came to harvest what Zion couldn't. Surplus crops were rescued and shared with families in need all across Israel. Financial help arrived, and slowly the fields came back to life. Today, every crop that Zion plants is a tribute to Tal's memory and a symbol of resilience. So you can stand with the farmers of Israel, like Zion, by supporting Leket Israel. Help turn loss into life and grief into hope and harvest into a blessing. So click the link on the description or visit blesstheharvest.org today. Again, that's blesstheharvest.org today. Now, we're getting back into the news and staying on the topic of the announcement by the European countries at the United Nations General Assembly meeting, because this is nothing less than a diplomatic tsunami. Almost 2 years after the October 7th massacre, Britain, Canada, and Australia announced at noon on Sunday that within minutes of each other, they basically recognized a Palestinian state. A few hours later, Portugal made the same announcement. With the decision by these 4 countries to recognize a Palestinian state, the number of countries in the world that have announced recognition stands at 152. And according to assessment later this week, several more countries are expected to recognize a Palestinian state as part of the convening of the United Nations General Assembly. These include France, Belgium, Malta, San Marino, Andorra, and Luxembourg. A question mark exists regarding two additional countries, New Zealand, which usually follows Australia's lead, and Finland. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer mentioned the hostages in a video that he published, called Hamas a brutal terrorist organization, and added, "This is not a reward for Hamas, because Hamas will have no future, no role in the Palestinian government or a role in the security. I have instructed that sanctions be imposed on additional Hamas figures in the coming weeks." He also accused Israel of brutal tactics and called to allow aid to flow into the Gaza Strip and to remove the unacceptable restrictions at the border. According to him, following the actions of the Israeli government and Hamas, hope for a two-state solution is fading, and we must not let that light be extinguished. 2 hours after the announcement by Britain, Canada, and Australia, the Israeli Foreign Ministry published an official response to the declaration by Britain and some other countries. Without mentioning Canada and Australia by name, the response stated that Israel categorically rejects the unilateral recognition by Britain and several other countries of a Palestinian state. This declaration does not advance peace. On the contrary, it further undermines stability in the region and harms the chances of achieving a peaceful solution in the future. And according to Israel, the declaration, which was dubbed by Hamas leaders the fruits of the October 7 massacre, not only rewards the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust by a terrorist organization that calls and acts towards the destruction of Israel, but also strengthens the support that Hamas enjoys. It is destructive to separate between statehood, one of the final status issues, and peace. This step contradicts all logic of negotiations and reaching compromise between two sides, and it will push further away the desired peace agreement. Furthermore, the Palestinian Authority has not met any of its requirements and commitments. It has stopped neither the incitement nor the pay-for-salary policy, nor has it taken the necessary measures to combat terrorism, as was demonstrated recently with the discovery of rockets and missiles near Ramallah in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority is part of the problem and not part of the solution. This is also the reason that the United States imposed sanctions on Palestinian Authority and barred its senior leaders from entering its territory. In any case, Israel will not accept any detached and imaginary text that will try to force it to accept indefensible borders. Political gestures aimed at local voter audience only harm the Middle East and are not helpful. Instead, if the countries that signed this declaration truly want to stabilize the region, they should focus on pressuring Hamas to release the hostages and disarm immediately. This is according to the Israeli statement. In Ramallah, the city north of Jerusalem that serves as the capital of the Palestinian Authority, they celebrated the announcement by Britain, Canada, and Australia with a senior Palestinian official triumphantly declaring to the Ynet Israeli media channel that the Balfour Declaration of the Palestinians is coming true. The world is with us. For its part, Hamas published a statement a few hours later in which it ignored Starmer's remarks directed against Hamas, the terrorist organization, and simply said that these declarations were an important step, but claimed that they must be accompanied by practical steps. In the list of points published by Hamas, it was written that those steps should lead to the immediate end of the war and the plans of annexation and Judaization in the West Bank and Jerusalem to isolate Israel and to bring Israel's leaders to international courts. This is a terrorist organization that's claiming all of this. According to this terrorist organization, resistance to the occupation is a natural right. The Palestinian people must be supported in confronting the crimes of the occupation. Again, this is according to Hamas. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded to the declaration by Britain, Canada, and Australia and said that the Palestinian state will not be established, adding that the response to the latest attempt to impose upon us, Israel, a terror state in the heart of our land will be given after my return from the United States. I have a clear message to those leaders who recognize the Palestinian state after the terrible massacre on October 7th. You are granting a huge reward to terror. according to Netanyahu. And he also referred implicitly to voices calling to respond to the decision by applying sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, noting that in recent years we have doubled the Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria, and we will continue on this path. And meanwhile, Kemi Ben-Nonch, the leader of the British Conservative Party and the political opposition in the parliament, tweeted, "Disaster, simply disaster. We will all regret the day that this decision was made, granting a reward to terror without any condition placed before Hamas. This leaves the hostages languishing in Gaza and does nothing to curb the suffering of the innocents that are caught in this war." And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on this matter, so keep spreading the truth, share and follow us. And most importantly, don't forget to click that subscribe button and share this video with people that want to know what's happening on the ground. Now, we are keeping our focus on diplomatic developments, but shifting our focus from attacks on Israel by Western countries to attack on Israel by Middle Eastern countries. About a week and a half after the Israeli airstrike in Doha, Qatar, in which 5 Hamas members were eliminated while the organization's senior leaders remained alive, Qatar is ramping up the legal and international campaign it is waging against Israel. In Doha, they defined the strike as a severe violation of the state sovereignty and declared that they will act through all legal channels to exhaust accountability. On the international law track, the Minister of the State at Qatar's Foreign Ministry, Dr. Mohammed bin Abdulaziz El Kaoufi, met in The Hague recently with the leadership of the International Criminal Court and examined with them the possibility of accountability mechanisms following the strike on Qatari territory. Although Qatar is not part of the Rome Statute, the government notes that relevant materials will be transferred to the prosecution and that additional courses of action will be examined in cooperation with the member states. As recalled, Doha also acted in the diplomatic arena, hosting an urgent summit of leaders from Arab and Islamic countries in Qatar on September 15th. Many of the heads of states that were present at the meeting expressed support for Qatar and condemned the violation of its sovereignty. In parallel, appeals were submitted to the United Nations institutions requesting a discussion and condemnation of this strike. Israel's government is insisting that this strike was an attempt to harm Hamas's leadership outside the Gaza Strip, and they have signaled that they will continue to act against members of the organization wherever they may be. In the shadow of this crisis, Doha has frozen its direct involvement in mediating efforts for a ceasefire and a hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas, and is examining its next steps. However, the assessment is that Qatar does not intend to completely give up the role as a mediator. However, even while they try to present themselves as a neutral mediator between Israel and Hamas, Qatar is funding the engine of incitement and defamation against Israel and spreading lies about what is happening in here all over the world, and they're not the only ones doing this. And we at Boots on the Ground are here to bring you the truth about what's happening in Israel. So if you want to help us, follow us, click the subscribe button, and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we're once again switching our focus to the kinetic threats, the real threats with military weapons against Israel that are coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps issued a warning on Sunday morning, days after reports of missile tests carried out by Tehran in the capital area and against the backdrop of tensions with Israel, that if the enemy makes mistakes, Iran's hand will be on top. It will seize the initiative on the battlefield and respond again in a lethal and instructive manner. This statement followed reports of eyewitnesses in Tehran who said that smoke trails, apparently from missile launches, were visible from the city towards other cities in the northeast of the country over the recent days. And elsewhere, the Fars news agency affiliated with the regime tried to downplay the scale of the event and noted that these were tests of internal systems only. Another news portal, Iran International, reported recently that air defensive systems and activity was also observed in western Tehran, but the authorities did not address this officially. According to the channel, this is a continuation of a series of mysterious events all over the country, including explosions and fires at industrial and security sites that have multiplied since the 12-day war. And at the same time, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian claimed in a statement over the weekend that the country will overcome any sanction, after the United Nations Security Council decided not to lift the restrictions on the Islamic Republic. This follows the activation of the snapback mechanism by Britain, France, and Germany. This is a step accepted to restore the sanctions in full by September 27. In a somewhat bizarre statement regarding these developments, Pezeshkian told the state television that by means of the snapback, they blocked the way, but mines are what open it. They can strike our nuclear facilities at Natanz or at Fordo, but they do not understand that those who built them and will rebuild them are human beings. And to make a brief comment on my own about all of this, President Pezeshkian is quite the human being himself, and in recent months I've observed that he seems to be getting tired of all of these lies and deceit that the Ayatollah regime is constantly pumping out. He has tried to gently suggest to the regime that it's time to stop gaslighting everyone, including themselves, and face the truth, but those suggestions don't seem to be getting any traction. So how much can one human being take? If we watch Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, we might soon get the answer. But in any case, Iran's Supreme National Security Council also had a statement over the weekend saying that if the sanctions are renewed, cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency will be suspended. And furthermore, on the occasion of Sacred Defense Week, the IRGC said, "We warn the Israeli enemy and the American administration against committing any mistake that harms Iran's interests or national security. The preparations for combat, planning, and intelligence capabilities are at the highest level of readiness and ready to respond." Once again, we're reminded that talk is cheap, especially in the Middle East. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on this subject, so keep spreading the truth and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now, we conclude this special holiday edition of Boots on the Ground with a story that is not directly related to Israel, but which might become very important for us in the not-so-distant future. During his recent state visit to London, United States President Donald Trump held a joint press conference with the United Kingdom Prime Minister Yair Starmer, in which he said, amongst other things, that he was trying to convince the Taliban, who have established their role in Afghanistan, to allow the United States military to take back control of Bagram Air Base. He also criticized the way that the United States withdrew from Afghanistan and the way that it was managed by President Joe Biden, and added that we are trying to get the base back because they need things from us. And Trump did not specify who exactly he meant. And in subsequent days, he brought up the subject once more, saying that if the Taliban did not return control of the Bagram Air Base to the United States military immediately, there would be consequences, which he did not elaborate on. In further remarks, Trump explained that one of the reasons that the administration wants the base is its strategic location, an hour's drive from where China makes its nuclear weapons. The Bagram base, which was built by the Soviet Union in the 1950s and was seized by the American military in 2001 as part of the war against the Taliban after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, is certainly in a very strategic location. The ability to project force from that base would give the Pentagon tremendous leverage over every other country in Central Asia, including China, but also including Iran. It would certainly be strategically useful to Israel if the United States had that kind of leverage once more. In any case, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in our neighborhood, the Middle East, and we will bring you the truth about what's happening in Israel. So keep spreading the truth, share, follow us, and remember, this is a spiritual war, but we are praying to our Father in heaven that has all the answers to every complicated situation. So let's pray that His will be done, that He will grant wisdom to all the leaders around the world to make the right and godly decisions, that He will protect our soldiers that are fighting in the Gaza Strip, that He will protect our people that have suffered for more than 700 days, that He will bring our hostages back from the Gaza Strip, that He will bring peace to all this region. So let's unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.